Good morning, afternoon, or noon, depending on where you are. I'm in New York, so it's good noon, and then in a minute or two it becomes afternoon. To all of you, welcome to our panel here at Netroots Nation. We really want to thank you for joining us today for this important discussion about inclusion, a topic that when we originally proposed it, we felt that we would sort of have to um, convince people that it's important. But history has a way of changing situations, and the situation has been changed. And now I think most of us here would pretty much agree that the inclusion of people of color, women, LGBTQ, and non-conforming people, people who have been traditionally excluded from decision making, from leadership, in all kinds of movements, particularly the technology movement. That kind of leadership is being viewed as a priority of a lot of our movements. What does that mean for technology? My name's Alfredo Lopez. I'm with May 1st Movement Technology. I'll explain that what that means in a little while. We want to get to our panel first, but we want you to do something. What we want to do in this workshop is to try to be as conversational with you as we possibly can. That's not always easy because you have a panel talking to people, but we don't want you necessarily to listen. Um, well, we want you to listen to everything we say, but don't listen all that much. Actually, be doing some of your own thinking. And so we have a question we would like you to type into the chat. On your screen, you'll see a couple of boxes. One is a chat box, and the other is a question or a Q&A box. Okay, there are icons for both of them. You use the chat to chat. Anybody can remember that. Use the Q&A to ask questions or even make comments directed toward the panelists. So after the panel presentations are over, I'm going to go through those questions and answers, and we'll try to address them as best we can. But here's a question for you. And we'd like you to tap this into the box. What does a democratic and inclusive internet mean to you? What does democratic and inclusive internet mean to you? So that's the subject of our conversation today. So feel free to put that into the chat box. And while you're at it, if we could ask you to uh, give us your first name or your name, your preferred pronoun, and your location, where you're from, so that we can know who we're talking to as best we can. If you feel comfortable doing that, please do so. Okay. But the question is, what does a democratic and inclusive internet mean to you? Um, and we have three panelists who are going to talk about what it means to them. And I'm going to run through their names, and then we're going to just go. It's like going to be like a relay, like track. Everybody just hands it off. You don't have to listen to me ever again until the Q&A period where I say something. So you'll be relieved. Um, we always, as technologists, by the way, acknowledge the technical assistance that we're receiving, any interpretation that we're receiving. May 1st Movement Technology is a bilingual and binational organization. It's a technology organization. Um, and so we want to acknowledge and thank Ariela for joining us today, providing the enormous technical support that she's providing from Netroots Nation. So we thank her very, very much. Alice Aguilar is joining us today. Alice is the Executive Director of Progressive Technology Project. She is a technologist, a woman of color. She has been pioneering it doesn't pioneer as a woman of color. That's been for a long time. But as a woman of color in the technology area and as a leader, she's one of our pioneers. and has seen a whole lot of it. And so she's at the center of this issue. We're going to hear later from Teresa Basilio Estambide, who has been in just about everything. Puerto Rican, like me. We're panitas together. Been working together for many years. Teresa is currently working with Media Justice, one of our favorite organizations, and she has had enormous history as an activist in many of these areas. She's prime. She's center to discuss this whole thing. And then finally, one of my favorite nieces in the whole world, Brandi Dexter, with whom I've been working for many years. This is like a family reunion that you have here. All of these people. Brandi worked for several years, for many years, at Color of Change, where you may have seen her on TV and giving different speeches at conferences and stuff like that. She certainly has worked with us at conferences. We're going to go to the movies in a little while. There are many reasons to listen to Alice Aguilar, but one reason you can stay put is that right after Alice, she's going to show you a movie. And I'm going to introduce that to you a little bit later. But first, I'm going to hand over the mic to Alice to kick us off in this panel. Once again, thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be talking to you today. Alice?
Thanks, Alfredo. Thanks, everybody. It's great to be here. My name is Alice Aguilar, and my pronouns are she, they, and I'm based in Austin, Texas. I am the Executive Director of Progressive Technology Project, or PTP. We are a social justice leftist nonprofit technology organization supporting grassroots organizations around the country using a political and critical lens to strategically use technology to help build power in people of color and low-income communities. Today, as Alfredo spoke, we want to talk about what a democratic and inclusive internet looks like, and also how our movements are hampered by the underrepresentation of people of color communities in decision-making around the internet and technology. Yeah, we are seeing more and more technology programs dedicated to people of color to help bring up the numbers of representation in tech. But many of these programs are pipelines to Silicon Valley, to powerful corporations who are in control of technologies and the internet. Essentially, I see this as a pipeline to build a workforce that continues to be in the service of the wealthy, where the powerful elite, these corporations, continue to make profit off the backs of Black and brown people. So why is this pipeline to corporations problematic? What more needs to be done? Let me back up a little here. I want to say it with this statement. People of color movements need to have access to secure and liberatory technologies and internet. That is, we need technologies that meet the needs of communities, free from oppression, repression, and racism. It's not about technology that's designed for surveillance and controlled by corporations and governments that are using tactics to repress voices and surveil particularly Black and brown communities. I like to bring up how powers, specifically corporate powers in government, especially in this Trump's authoritarian administration, are shaping how information is distributed and the tactics used to attack and repress voices, especially people of color. We're seeing how corporations are using this free speech argument and currently working on potential future laws with the Trump administration to define what will be censored or not censored online. Oppression, repression, hate, and violence is what we are seeing online, and this is not about free speech. It's about attacking human beings, particularly people of color, indigenous, women, queer, and trans communities that have historically been oppressed, silenced, and pushed to the fringes. This free speech argument is being misused by corporations and government in regards to what will be banned or censored online, and is scarily pushing a fascist agenda. They want to develop laws to protect their interests, their capital, and their property. So free speech is not a capitalist construct. And so if we think about having corporations self-monitor what they consider free speech, that can be a little dicey. We saw recently Facebook and Zuckerberg backpedaling and decided to change their policies to ban hate speech, but only after activists mobilized and convinced a number of major corporations and brands to pull their ads in this Stop Hate for Profit campaign. We need to reframe this argument and have a more nuanced discussion so we can address the underlying systemic structures at play and work to dismantle oppression, racism, capitalism, and imperialism. There are three major corporations that control technology and the internet: Google, Microsoft, Amazon. And they're all at the top for having huge military contracts with the government. Corporate technology's bottom line is profit, as what capitalism does. So can we really trust that corporations will do good by us, by humanity, as they design and have total control over tech infrastructure? I read in the New York Times earlier this week that the FCC has approved Amazon's 3,236 satellite constellation, which aims to provide high-speed internet globally. This is in addition to SpaceX that's just deploying thousands of satellites for the same purpose, and paves the way for potentially Facebook and others to do the same. This is especially worrisome as corporations take control of global tech infrastructure, a communications and information network that people globally rely on. Our movements rely on corporate technologies, social media platforms, internet providers, mobile data providers for communications and organizing strategies. Corporations can also set corporate policies that can change on a whim, that can deny services because they disagree with political stance. For example, we at PTP, we work with over 135 organizations that use this open source database called Powerbase, based on CiviCRM. A couple of years ago, we worked with the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, CLRJ, who were having issues with getting approved for a payment processor called IATS, so they could raise funds through their database. And they asked us for help. After investigating, we were shocked to see that IAT's parent company and primary acquiring bank, First American Payment Systems of Fort Worth, Texas, has an official policy that it will not process payments for organizations offering reproductive rights counseling or abortion services. This corporation's policy demonstrates a clear value statement that continues to perpetuate the stigma around abortions. Here in the state, where we're seeing a battleground against the most harshest anti-abortion bills we're seeing already. So it's throwing up the barrier for these groups fighting anti-abortion bills and also trying to raise funds to provide access to medically safe abortion services for people of color and low-income communities. So we end up working collaborative with CLRJ to work on a campaign to boycott the use of this IATS payment processor. My last point, some folks have been asking, what if when we're talking about governments, corporations, shut down the internet? Well, it's already happening. We are witnessing internet shutdowns as acts of repressions by governments such as India and Ethiopia to shut down any online public reprisals or uprisings in response to police violence or changes in law or resistance to governments and so on. You can check out, there's this interesting project in India and it's at internetshutdowns.in. If we want a free and liberatory internet, then people of color communities need to develop their own tech, build skills around alternatives, and control their own technology and infrastructure to meet their needs. People of color, folks, need to be at the table to decide on the role of technology that supports their needs and for the future of their communities. We also need to find alternative ways to depending on corporate technologies. There's a lot of work being done, bringing together people of color, movement technologists and activists together to discuss the role of technologists, the role of technology, and its relationship to movement building strategies. So I'm going to pass it on to Alfredo, Teresa, and Brandi to talk more about what we can do and what's being done in our struggle for a free and liberatory internet and technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice. That was wonderful. And Alice, I understand, is now going to switch duties and start, what is it going to be like, the projectionist? She's going to start revving up our video. It's a short video. I just want to prep it and explain to you what it's all about. This is for 2 years, about a year and a half to 2 years, our organization, in collaboration with several of the organizations here, by the way, with Media Justice, with PTP, and partnering. At times, we partnered with people from CFC, Color of Change, and many others, to do a project called the Technology and Revolution Convergences. In this project, we brought together groups of 20 to 25 activists from various parts of the country and Mexico. Remember, May 1st is also organized in Mexico. 1/6 of our membership is actually in Mexico. So we did those technology and revolution sections down there. And we got into a room, we just asked people to talk about the intersection between technology and fundamental social change. What it would mean. Can you imagine the future of your society? What kind of world do you want? And they started with that question and came all over the place, all different things they need. And then realized that, and this is an important question for us here, that world that we can imagine, that we all want, is actually feasible given the technology we have. We can have the world that we need and want with the technology we have in place. So how does that happen? And that was the point of the convergences. People addressed what we need to do in terms of technology to make that happen, to give us a technology that we can use to fashion this new world that we need, not only get us there, but to prepare it, to build that world, to construct it, and to maintain it in a sustainable way. So this is the video that explains the points of unity that came out of all those sessions. The narrator will explain this, but this is 1,500 frontlines activists in these two countries coming out with these points of unity. So let's watch the movie. Ali, if you would, please.
Our lives are driven by information technology. Our society has been fundamentally changed by it, and our future, as unclear as it is, will be enabled by it. Your day, from start to finish, involves technology in a significant way. And that technology is in the hands and under the control of people whose drive for profit blinds them to human need. From 2017 to 2019, about 1,500 activists in the United States and Mexico came together in 25 local and regional convergences to talk about the intersection between technology and revolution. How to use it now and in the future, and how to democratize it to make sure we have a future. Because the consensus was, if we don't control our technology, we have no future as a human race. In intense conversations, often lasting several hours, these activists hammered out points of unity they felt our movements should adopt and work around. As the process continued, these points were refined and expanded to the 8 points we are presenting today. The people who participated in Technology and Revolution propose that your organization make these 8 points part of your own strategy and your work. Let's go over them. Provide everyone with full, free, high-speed, equitable access to the internet, independent of content. Build an internet that is democratic, community-centered and governed, open, decentralized, and free of corporate pressure and monopolies. Build a political technology campaign to oppose, restrain, and ultimately eliminate surveillance. Move technology to prioritize sustainability, community thriving, climate justice, and many worlds are possible. Seek out, build, and embrace the potential of digital technologies to protect and advance our movements. Improve and deepen the collaboration and mutual education between movement technologists and other movement activists and organizations. Foster political consciousness about the centralization of technology in movement work and the urgency of revolutionary movement-based technology. Expand the technology conversation beyond settler colonial technology and thinking to be culturally relevant, intersectional, and grounded in political education and historical context.
And thank you very much, Alice. That video on technology and revolution. With that, we're going to slide into the presentation by Teresa Savacilio. Teresa, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Just want to say I'm honored to be here, particularly with these fierce folks that are on the panel with me. So loving being here with all of you. So as Alfredo mentioned, my name is Teresa Savacilio Estambide, and I am the Network Strategies Director with Media Justice. I use she, her pronouns, and I am based out of Brooklyn, New York. So I'm going to actually share my screen. I just have a few slides to share while I do my presentation. And I also want to welcome you to please put in questions that you have. Keep just putting them into the Q&A button underneath our in the Zoom screen. So here we go. So as I mentioned, I work at Media Justice, and Media Justice advances racial, economic, and gender justice in a digital age by fighting for just and participatory platforms for expression. My role at MJ is to coordinate the network, which is led by over 100 local organizations, and we're trying to harness the community power, build our power to claim our right to media and technology that keeps us all connected, represented, and free. And I wanted to, for this presentation, highlight a few of our campaigns that I think speak to some of the points of unity that was mentioned in the video and that Alfredo discussed. And, but first of all, I want to just point you to the mediajustice.org, the website, where you can see a lot about all the other work that we're doing. There's a lot going on in the world. So I welcome all of y'all to take a look at that. I'm going to just focus on two pieces of the campaigns. I'm going to focus on Internet for All and on Protect Black Dissent as representative of speaking to these points of unity. And actually, I'm going to leave it at there for a second. I think I'm going to actually go off share. Okay, so for the first one that I wanted to talk about is Internet for All, and Media Justice is working and leading a coalition of national organizations to really close the digital divide. And the goal is to close that divide in the next 4 years. So, you know, you have to have a plan. And so what's the problem? We have some internet access, but it's not what we need, and it's not what our communities need. We have over 20 million people who don't have access to high-speed internet. We have most folks who have internet don't even have it at home. And so with the pandemic, we see that over 17 million students actually don't have access to education because they don't have internet access at home. And we also have these corporations, these telecoms like Comcast and Charter and AT&T, who have monopoly on high-speed internet in their areas, and that continues to keep the prices high. So another thing that telecoms do, like we know, is they pressure states to pass laws that prevent cities and municipalities from providing internet-free internet, municipal broadband networks. And we've seen the harsh impact of that throughout the United States. So as far as media justice and what we're trying to do with the Internet for All campaign is we're trying to, first, the narrative needs to shift, that the internet is not a privilege. It's not something that only the rich should be able to afford, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps and then you'll get the internet. It doesn't work that way. It should be a public utility. It should be a right. We need it in this world to access services, to speak to our loved ones. I mean, it's absolutely critical. And we need policies that represent that reality of the internet is a right and a utility. And so at Media Justice, we've been pressuring Congress to include subsidies in the next stimulus bill to make sure that that's part of the conversation. We also have been pushing these corporations to prioritize the needs of communities. And we know that they'll only do it by being pressured. They're not going to do it out of their own free will. So one of the examples of that is we've been working with student organizers in Philadelphia, Baltimore, and in Detroit to pressure Comcast, who has the monopoly of high-speed internet there, to make free access to the internet. And there has been some win around that recently in Philadelphia, where we were able to pressure Comcast to agree to put $17 million in a digital equity plan to connect those students to the internet. We also need to think about new models of ownership that takes it out of the hands of these private corporations whose interests are not the interests of the people. And what that can look like, it can look like a lot of different things. So one thing is to overturn these state broadband preemption laws that I mentioned, where they have these monopolies. Also directing federal funding to broadband away from local corporations. And it can also look like supporting community technology projects, such as the Detroit Community Technology Project and the Resilient Networks Project in New York City, and other experiments in decentralized community wireless technologies that are focused on a digital stewardship model, which what that means is that people in these communities are themselves not only using this internet, but they're actually designing how this infrastructure is built. They're making decisions about where the technology will be placed and how it will be maintained. And they're also being trained in that. So there's a digital literacy aspect to it. And there's also a resilient aspect to it with regards to being able to be responsive to the needs of these communities as we face increased climate change and other challenges. And so, yeah, I want to highlight the alternatives. We have the pushback to the corporations, and we also have alternatives. So we need to be able to do multiple things to address this issue. It's a complex problem which requires multiple issues. The second campaign that I want to highlight, and I think it's really important to talk about, is the Protect Black Dissent campaign that Media Justice has been leading for a while. And for that, I want to just think about, let's look at history for a little bit and address the fact that Black dissent has been criminalized and surveilled since the beginning, and that the FBI and other law enforcement agencies continue to do that work. And I think that we have been very attentive to the ways in which that happens, particularly because, as these uprisings have really taken off and people are demanding that, Black life and that we preserve the dignity of Black people in this country and really change the conversation around policing, around safety, around all these issues, right? That we also look at the ways in which the state, in collaboration with corporations, have been trying to, control and criminalize folks. And so, the increased state violence has come alongside increased surveillance tools. That's very worrisome. And, we've talked about how in Birmingham they used hoses and dogs. And well, now they're using stingrays that, collect your data from your cell phone. They're using drones. They're using tanks. They're using, all sorts of facial recognition, all sorts of increasingly, honestly, scary and abusive technologies that only serve to further criminalize folks and attack them. And so, with this expansion, we are doing a few things to try to push back on that. So one is ensuring that we are not allowing these law enforcement groups to evade responsibility for their surveillance practices, to bring that out into the open. So we have a project with the ACLU where we're suing the FBI for information to gather documents. They've been compelled to turn over lots of documents, heavily redacted, of course, but we're still pushing for that. We also want to ban the use of surveillance technology by police and law enforcement, and I am including in here also Border Patrol and ICE and other forms of law enforcement. So Media Justice did help pass the nation's first facial recognition ban in San Francisco, and to date there's been a lot of other cities, including Oakland and Boston, that have passed some similar bans, and we need to ban facial recognition. And we should also push these companies who are doing business with law enforcement to not do business with law enforcement, not to profit off of this. And so I just want to highlight one last one, which is Tech is Not Neutral, and that's with the Kairos Fellowship, with Movement for Black Lives, and other great folks to pressure these companies directly to stop doing business with the police. And so we've seen in the uprisings how, like, for instance, Microsoft that had to pledged to divest from producing and selling facial recognition for at least a year, but we'll see. We have to keep pushing. So those are two. And I wanted to then, just for the last thing, just share what you can do. And so I have here, let me move it to the next slide. Take action. So, please go to the website at mediajustice.org. Support these calls to ban facial recognition and also incarceration technologies in your cities and states. You can take the pledge at Tech is Not Neutral. There's also ways that you can get involved in the Internet for All and in the Protect Black Dissent work by going to the website. So I encourage you to do that. And I think I'm going to pass it to Brandi. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I wish I could see all of your faces. My name is Brandi Collins Dexter. My preferred gender pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm located in Baltimore. For 6 years, I worked at Color of Change, one of the largest racial justice organizations in the country, and I'm gonna speak from that perspective. We were founded in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina as a digital-first organization built on this idea of citizen lobbying, and since then have grown to over 7 million members in the US. There are some organizations that do strictly like government work, or strictly like negotiating with corporations or cultural change work. We try to do it all because we're a kind of like by any means necessary sort of organization, but we are under no illusion that reform or some sort of return to some like heralded past is what we need for like liberation and equity. We know that only through the adoption of revolutionary tech and only through the dismantling of oppressive monopolies and corporate concentration can we begin to move towards a type of vision that we all can believe in. And so I'm gonna actually focus in on those 2 points. One of the things that many of us have often talked about is that people of color, marginalized communities, subcultures are often not just the fastest adopters of new technology, but are often the builders of new technology, because we are always looking for what are the next tools, means, infrastructure that we can build that gets us closer to the equity that we're seeking. But that entrepreneurial spirit of invention is threatened by the consolidation of power in the hands of a few large companies. This not only challenges innovation and creation, but socioeconomic mobility, privacy, access to information. The advent of the technology industry, rapid consolidation impacts control not only our markets, but our entire modes of commerce and communication. And when we do that, that constricts the flow of information, that threatens to turn a public forum in which ideas, products, and services can be openly exchanged into a curated experience in which choice and access are privileged, even though these companies often say their role is to create the opposite impact. From a racial justice perspective, all major industries in America are and always have been monopolies because they've been monopolized by white owners, white decision makers, and it's a racial monopoly, even if it's not an economic monopoly. It didn't matter if it was one business that took over a town or took over an industry, or if it was a dozen or more companies colluding and synced on Black norms. The impacts for Black communities and many of our communities were the same: exclusion from service, exploitation of labor, vulnerabilities and discrimination on the job, and no recourse. And we know history shows that when everyday people come together and take collective action, often we win progress. But when corporate executives come together and take action, we usually lose freedom, intellectual property, and opportunity. Inequities in our economy stem from corporations often being able to come together or becoming too big to fail. And while it's easy to just challenge one company rather than a set of them, the impacts of inequities and injustice is just the same. The reemergence of what we've seen in this sort of unrestrained monopoly power in the tech industry is a continuation of history, a history that has often shown that forward progress in civil rights will often be met with attempts to consolidate power using race as an underlying wedge issue. The people that have constructed the visible and invisible rules that govern our society have continued to find ways to move the goalposts to maintain an economic, social, and political apartheid on our back. And oftentimes what we see now is that comes in like closing the door to tech opportunities, whether that's opportunities to have tech in our communities or opportunity to build our own tech, or opportunities to even work in these like larger tech spaces. And we know historically that that 90% of media is owned by 6 companies, and that our community-owned media, which has often been a crucial hub for organizing, has suffered from that. And we've seen in sort of replacement from that, oftentimes a movement onto these like larger tech entities. And oftentimes we hear these stories that these tech companies like to talk about, oh, the revolution is because of Twitter or because of Facebook and our ability to organize on these platforms. And again, we would say that no, we have always been savvy at using whatever tools are at our disposal to build power, but we are also very clear that just like the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, those tools will not release us from our digital prisons either, or physical ones. And so part of what I think is super important about these points is this incorporation of antitrust, corporate concentration, breaking up monopolies, because that is a part of the story. Even when we have an analysis of corporate power, too often those that are at the table making the rules of the road around these issues tend to be white male, tend to not be from our communities, and do not always necessarily hold our interests at the center of that work. And so it is crucial that that we in our communities build more of a movement around entering those government spaces and demanding the breakups of these companies, demanding accountability from these companies through these lenses. But oftentimes in this antitrust space, we get to this point where it's like, oh, we just break them up, right? And then everything's magical and great and liberation is won and all of that. And we all know that that is not enough, that we have to have wider adaptation of revolutionary tech in our communities. That's similar to what we've seen with some adaptation of tools like Signal, that we need to be prepared to really think about what are those alternative bricks, and that we all as organizations should be building this road that takes us away from the Googles, from the Twitters, from the Facebooks, and that often center our talent, our intellectual property, and the mission that we often hold as we're building our technology as a priority for the new tools that we use for our movement. And so I want to kind of close by saying that in addition to being at the table at antitrust, oftentimes what we see missing, and part of why I was excited about this project, is that there's this whole like technologists of color space or people, women that are building technology that's often diverse from racial justice spaces, which are often diverse from these like political spaces. And part of this movement that was led by May 1st People League, Media Justice, and others was really to imagine a world in which we're all not just operating in our silos, but coming together to talk about what are all the facets of our revolution? What does that look like? How do we all play our part to get to this vision of what's possible? And so I hope to see that work continued and not just end with these unity principles, which I think are great, but what does that actually look like in the phase 2, the phase 3, and beyond? And so I hope that this is one of the spaces in which we can begin to have that conversation as we move forward. And I'll kick it back to Alfredo, and thank you.
Thank you so very much, Brandi, for that excellent presentation. You too, Teresa. Those were outstanding presentations, and people should respond, ask questions. Use the question box, please. That's at the bottom of your screen. Tap on the Q&A icon. Tap in your questions thus far. No one has done that. And what happens then is you're penalized by having to listen to me for the rest of the time. You don't want to do that, okay? So that's even yet another reason why you should ask questions. But we would like to talk to you. We'd like to get your opinions and hear what you have to say. May First Movement Technology is kind of sponsoring and bringing this thing together. We are also the sponsors of the Technology and Revolution Convergences, along with many of the organizations that are here represented. We are a membership organization. We're part of the left-wing movement for fundamental change. We concentrate and work on technology. We are fully democratic. That means we elect all of our leadership. Our members get together and approve the plan of work, which we've just started right now for this year, organizing the membership meeting, which is, I can't tell you the headaches that are involved in bringing together. We're basically 900 members. That's over 2,000 people, because we have a lot of members that are organizations from the United States and Mexico. So it's got to be in 2 languages. Everything is in English and Spanish. We're intentional. And that's the point that I wanted to make. All the organizations here gathered, and the people you see here, you may have noticed, was myself and 3 women, but all of us are people of color. And we intentionally do that in May 1st. Democratically, it is possible to do that. So that, for example, the board of 25 people that runs May 1st between member meetings during the year, it is 21 of us are people of color and women. There's only 4 white men. They're really great guys. No one is throwing white people out the window here. But we are recognizing the role that people of color are playing in our movement and are playing in terms of forging the future. And that is intentionality. That's part of what we're doing, and part of what this workshop is all about. And so we honor and thank you very, very much. We appreciate you coming by and being willing to talk to us and asking questions and of us, because you're effectively supporting that intentionality when you do that. Supporting a very critical part of the changes in leadership, composition, and thrust of our movement for social change. It's going to benefit everyone. It's going to include and involve everyone. And so one question is being asked here: what tech platforms are you looking at to replace organizing on Facebook, Twitter, all that social media? Or are you instead building it? So what are the alternatives that people are seeing, in terms of this social media stuff that all of us have talked about? Anyone in the panel can answer.
I'd like to respond. First, I'd like to sort of twist the question a little bit, because I don't think what we're looking for is technology to replicate Facebook, Twitter, all these things. One of the things when we think about building, we think about, first of all, what needs to happen is we have to be in collaboration with communities that need the tools that they need, right? So the design needs to be driven by communities rather than like tech groups just sort of designing on their own in their silo. So that needs to change. But with that said, we are looking at open source technologies that are existing out there and how things could be done better. But again, we're talking about, this is being done from the ground up, right? We don't have resources like corporations have resources. We're not seeing funding coming into grassroots organizations to support building some sort of infrastructure, right? Where there's minimal, so like, it's really difficult to move this without one, we have to have collaborations with communities on the ground. They need, people of color need to be at that table to decide what is it, because these technologies are actually telling us how we should be communicating. That's bull, right? It's like they're telling us this is the way you should communicate, this is the way you should, how you need to like things. It's like they're trying to design how we communicate. That's not how we communicate. So let's figure out how to create our own designs, use our indigenous knowledge, our community knowledge to develop what we need. So again, we do look at open source technology. So for example, and I'm not going to talk about replication. There are things like Jitsi Meet as an alternative to Zoom, or Big Blue Button is another open source technologies. We're looking at open source databases, but really again, what are those things, and can we build these peer-to-peer kind of technologies, decentralized technologies? I love the idea of what's happening in Detroit and in New York, these community networks, trying to figure out how else can we, bring whatever, the internet or communication systems. But then what about going back and like, what is our backup plan, right? It's like, what about radio? I remember back in the day, radio, airwaves. Why, we need to look at all the alternatives, all the existing things that we've done in the movement over time that have been working. So those need to go in hand in hand. So I just want to sort of put a twist on that. Like, instead of like, we don't look at it as like what we build. We want to talk about what, as a community, as movements, what do we want? I'll leave it there.
In the time we have left, which is not very much, we're actually supposed to wrap up right now. But I do want to take this question of if we could address it, if I survived it. Someone is posting, what the panelists think about technology. This is a really important question about technology and climate, both in terms of the resiliency of technology, but also the global impact of tech industry on climate, pollution, etc. That's something that we didn't necessarily dwell on here, but that is a really critical question. It was talked about in Technology and Revolution. Can someone, one of us, address it? And we are going to wrap with this question. Anyway, there were only 2 questions left there. So, yeah, there's another one.
I know others would answer better, but just a couple quick things. I think that movement around data centers in our different communities is definitely in need of more work and attention. The data centers are really creating major climate issues in these different communities. They're also getting a lot of tax loopholes, and none of that is like benefiting the community in a meaningful way. So I think that's one of the things that we should look at, as well as like some of the other different pieces around the impact of this work. I don't know, others probably have more to say about that, but I did want to.
Yeah, I'd like to just quickly talk about a little more around the community technology piece and why it's so important, particularly from a climate justice perspective. We're seeing how, with increased climate emergencies, there's always been them, but increasing climate emergencies, we have, and the folks who are being inordinately hit are poor communities, are people of color communities, are, the southern world. And so we understand that that there is a need to have community control over our technology over our infrastructure, because if we don't have that, then what will happen is kind of what, you know, we've seen in New Orleans after Katrina, we saw in Puerto Rico after Maria and Irma, we saw in other places where, you know, the disaster capitalism comes in with these technologies, claiming to somehow innovate and bring internet, bring communications, bring all these things, but they don't actually do that. They're not responsive to the needs of the people. They're not. It's not, you know, something that's meant to be for that. It's meant for profit. And so that becomes the answer that governments give us, these private public collaborations, which in fact do not provide for our people and in fact increase the suffering. And so we actually need to invest a lot more in community-centered infrastructure, because as climate change continues, folks are going to need responsive communications infrastructure to be able to talk to each other, because we know that they're not made to be resilient. They're not made to have, you know, battery power and solar power, and to be decentralized so that different folks can respond to each other, to organize and do mutual aid with each other. But those are the needs in our community. So we have to be able to prioritize that over these supposedly quick fixes from Google and other large corporations that don't actually have the interests of our communities.
So I know there's another question about public infrastructure. We can't get to it because they're about to shut us up. Here at Netroot Nation, when you get shut down, they like shut the thing down. It's like, you know, like where all the lights go, like the electricity goes down in the city. That's the feeling that you get. So you don't want to have that happen. So instead, if our panelists just give us one sentence that you want the crowd here to walk out with. Each of us, one sentence, starting with you, Ali.
Oh my God, it's like a test. I think one thing I want to leave with is that if we're going to continue moving and building and wanting a liberatory internet and technology, we need to build in public political education into everything we do. We need to change the framework of technology, that it's not about comfort. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Teresa.
I'll just reiterate that, you know, the internet and communication infrastructures are a basic human right. It's not a privilege. It's not something to be made profit off of, just like it should be for water, for power, for all these other needs that are part of our ability to have dignity as people. So that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you. Brandi.
Yeah, there's we just came off of a major tech CEO hearing around antitrust. There's a lot of energy unfolding there, and there needs to be marginalized communities at the table driving forward what happens next and ensuring that whatever administration is in power holds an antitrust and corporate concentration agenda. I'll close there.
Thank you so very much, all of our panelists. We are May1st.coop, and I am Alfredo at May1st.org. I love to get people's email unless I owe you money. I looked through the list. I don't think anybody's involved in that. I can see. We do want to thank Ariela so very much for your outstanding support. Much love, much respect, and thank each and every one of you for joining us in our conversation today here at Netroots Nation. Have a great rest of the short period of conference. I understand that the closing is coming at 5 o'clock Eastern or something like that. It sounds very interesting. Lineup of speakers, and rest of your weekend. Thank you all very much. Love and respect. Thank you.